Hi everybody, I'm Hector Garcia, I'm a CPA, and I'm a fan of all things QuickBooks. I'm going to walk you through step by step how to set up payroll in your QuickBooks Online and how to execute your first paycheck. Now I already have a QuickBooks Online account that we're going to be using for this video. If you don't have a QuickBooks Online account, I'm going to put a link in the description below, and if you use that link, you can get a brand new account for 30% discount for the first 12 months. Same thing for payroll. If you add payroll to your QuickBooks Online using my link, you can get 30% off for the first 12 months. Anyway, the way you can tell first if you already have payroll added into QuickBooks, we're going to click on the gear menu on the top right of the screen, and then we're going to go to where it says subscriptions and billing. Inside subscriptions and billing, you should see what version of QuickBooks Online you currently have and any add-ons such as payroll or online payments. In this particular case, I have already enabled Payroll Premium in my QuickBooks Online account. And there's the additional price that I'll be paying for the payroll portion. Now, when you come to choose which version of payroll you're going to have the Core, Premium, and Elite. Core is your basic payroll. It has everything you need to run payroll successfully, to pay your taxes, to withhold taxes from your employees, to pay electronically. Technically, most people don't need anything else more than Core. However, if you go to Premium, there's one key component. You'll be able to do job costing, which means you can add project and job information to each of your paychecks. That way you can track profitability by project to include payroll. You also have a little bit additional product support, same day direct deposits. You have a tax penalty protection. So if you make a mistake, QuickBooks makes a mistake, they will take care of that. And there's some fine lines around that. Definitely check that out. And you will actually have an expert from QuickBooks to actually help you through the process of doing payroll. If you've never done it before, it's probably worth paying a little bit extra to have someone else take care of it or take a look at the setup for you. If you go all the way to Elite, you're going to have additional benefits such as more tax protection, a more expert setup for your payroll, and this concept called certified payroll, which is going to be useful for contractors that have that requirement. There's also a couple of additional HR, performance management type of things that you are allowed to use on these higher versions of the payroll. Definitely check that out. This stuff is always changing. Also, the prices you see on the screen are always subject to change. That's kind of how it works. And on top of the base fee, you also will pay an additional per employee fee. Anyway, again, if you don't have payroll added to your QuickBooks yet, you could do it on your own by going into here. However, if you want to get a little bit of a better deal, make sure to contact me and I'll make sure someone from Intuit that works with me directly gives you that 30% off for the first 12 months. Okay, so we have payroll set up already. Let's now go to the process of setting it up and running our first payroll. So I'm going to go into the All Apps section here on the left-hand side, and then I'm going to go into Payroll. Now, I can start by clicking on Overview. That's kind of the first step here for Payroll, or I could just click to where it says Payroll, and it will take me automatically to the Overview page. Now, usually when you start from the very first time, you are going to go through a setup process, and usually there'll be a video that kind of walks you through it, but I'm going to walk you through it. So I'm going to click on Get Started. I'm going to do the very first step here, which is answer the question. So were there any employees paid in the last period? I'm going to say no. And the reason why this matters is because if you had a different payroll provider before, maybe one of the major payroll companies, or maybe your accountant was doing payroll for you, you might want to make sure that the year-to-date payroll information is entered in here. That way, when you create the W-2s for the year end, it all makes sense. So that situation may vary based on when you're setting up payroll and if you're transferring from another payroll provider. Strongly recommend that if you are transferring from another payroll provider, you go with a higher tier option, the Premium or the Elite, so you can have someone from Intuit make sure that that stuff is entered correctly, unless you have an accountant that you're engaging on this process, because that stuff gets kind of tricky to enter that. But I'm going to start from scratch and then click on Next. Then it says, when will be your first payday with QuickBooks? So whenever your very first paycheck is going to be, you pick that date in there, okay? And then that will be what QuickBooks has organized as officially your very next paycheck. So I'm just going to say that my very next paycheck is going to be, for example, January 15th, 2026, and then click on next. Then what is your primary work location? This is basically your address. So you're going to put your legal address in here. That way, QuickBooks knows which state you're in and potential municipality. And depending on where you are, you may have to do not just federal withholding, but also state withholding. So we're going to go ahead and go through the process and enter all this information. Then you're going to enter your contact information. And then that should be the very first step. So the address is entered, your company information is entered, and you should be good to go. If you're using the higher tier versions of Payroll, you can sign up for the review and schedule some time with someone from QuickBooks to check that out for you. Now, you can go through this standard setup process where it takes you step by step, or you can manually create each of the employees and all that stuff. So you can go either route. I'm going to go through the setup process and then I'm going to show you how to do it manually so you kind of know both angles. So I'm going to click on this little pencil for your business information. That's where you put your address. That's where you can always go back and change that. So even if you don't go through that step-by-step process, you can always go back and edit that. Now let's talk about entering team members. So when you enter the team member, you have to enter all their information that is usually collected in something called the Form I-9. So as an employer, you have to get information from your employee, such as their name, their tax ID or their social security number, their legal address, and also what their withholding preferences are for their paychecks. Again, Form I-9 is used to do that. If you're not collecting a physical Form I-9, what you can do is you can click here where it says Employee Self-Onboard, and essentially you're going to email the employee the information, and the employee will log into a portal that kind of looks like this, and they will enter their own information. So you kind of have both ways that you can enter information directly as the employer, or you can have the employee sort of self-serve. So I'll go ahead and enter the employee information in here, their email, their hire date. I'm going to click on I'll enter the information myself, and then I'm going to click on Add Employee. Now keep in mind that the middle tier, the premium, and the elite tier also have something called time tracking that allows the employee to clock in and clock out through their phone and has all sorts of additional features that are particularly for time tracking, for clocking in, clocking out, that sort of thing. So once the employee information is created, we can click on Add Another Employee or Finish Payroll Info to go to the next step. So now that I have created an employee, I now have entered the first preliminary information, but there might be more information we need to enter. So originally was in the overview section, and I was going through the process of going through the tasks, but now I can click on employees, and then in here I can see all my employee directory. Now, if any of my employees have that little warning sign, that means that some information is missing. For example, I haven't put the employee's social security number in yet, so we have to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that employee to basically go into their personal profile. And in here, I can edit and enter more information. So I'm going to click on Edit here where it says Personal Info. And then anything that's missing, such as their phone number or their address, I'm going to go ahead and enter that. QuickBooks does require you to have that employee's address in there, the date of birth, and the social security for them to be able to process the paycheck. So once you make sure you enter the address, the date of birth, and social security number, we go to Save. And now we no longer have that little warning exclamation mark. Here it says Employee Details. There's another piece of warning here. So we're going to click on Edit and finish entering that part. So we have our hire date, pay schedule. That's really important. You need to create the pay schedule, and you may have different employees on different pay schedule depending on, you can have some employees that you pay them weekly. You can have some salary employees you pay monthly or semi-monthly, that sort of thing. That's where you create that payment schedule. So let's say, for example, that we pay them twice a month, and the first paycheck is the 15th, and then the next paycheck will be the end of the month. That's a very typical semi-monthly payment. There's a couple of interesting pieces here where you can do end date or number of days before pay date. You have all sorts of ways to customize exactly what the timing of each of these paychecks look like. And then you get to name your payment schedule. Again, relevant if you have multiple employees on different schedules. I'll go ahead and click on Save. And there's some additional information you can enter, but if it doesn't have the asterisk, it's not required information. So we can move forward and click on save. Perfect. So no longer have any asterisks here, so I should be able to start creating my first paycheck. Now, as we go down, there's all different add-ons and options that you see for each employee. The ones that really matter are the exclamation mark. So it looks like we still have some more information to enter. So let's go into payment method. We'll click on start. And then here's where you can choose whether you want to do direct deposit. So if the employee gives you the direct deposit information, if they didn't enter it during that self-serve portion of the setup, and they give you their information, they can give you using this form, which is great. You can use the form that Intuit gives you. They can fill in their bank account information, the routing number, all that stuff. That way you can just hand key it in here if it's going to be direct deposit. Now, just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to do a paper printed paycheck. But of course, 9 times out of 10, you probably want to do direct deposit. It's going to be much better. So I'm going to click on save. And then that is set up. So it looks like we have one more thing that we have to enter here, which is their base pay. So I'm going to click on start. And then here's where you can choose whether your employee is hourly, salary, or commission only. I'm going to go ahead and click on hourly and say that this employee gets $40 an hour. And then there's also some additional information down here about default working hours for pre-filling timesheets and schedules and that sort of thing, but that's not 100% necessary. So we'll click on save. And then we'll scroll down and see if there's any other things that need the attention. So there's time off, deductions and contributions, and emergency contact. It is not required, but it is probably very useful for you to go through these screens so you can understand what options you have. Let's go to time off so we get an understanding how this part of the payroll works. So vacation pay, let's say, for example, that we have a new vacation policy, and we're going to call it standard policy or something like that. And then let's say that basically at the beginning of the year, they accumulate 40 hours per year. So basically 1 week. And then the maximum allowed is 80. So in case they carry over, the maximum they can carry over is 80 hours. So basically that's 1 week a year that they earn for every year worked, or maximum of two weeks they can accumulate at any point in time. There's a lot of interesting different ways of having this, based on pay period, based on hourly work, based on anniversary date. Unlimited. Unlimited is interesting because you basically track when they are on vacation, but you don't necessarily, they don't run out. It's just for you to know what's vacation pay and what's not vacation pay. So I find that interesting to have all those options. So we click on save. And then also current balance, if they're carrying over any balance, you can add that. You can also add pay time off, PTO, on top of vacation pay, and then sick pay and unpaid time off. You can have all sorts of tracking for that. Let me go ahead and click on save. Then I'm going to go down to deductions and contributions. I'm going to click on start. And then here's where you add all these moving parts of paychecks. And this is the beauty of QuickBooks Payroll. This is the stuff that makes payroll really complicated, and they make it super easy for you to track. So here on deductions and contributions, we have all sorts of things we can add. So one of the things I recommend adding is health insurance. If your business offers health insurance, you put that in there, and then you can choose the type of insurance that it is. So let's say it's medical. And then you can choose which portion is the one that the employee pays versus what the employer pays. So we're just going to call this insurance. And then the deduction is the flat amount. That's the amount that the employee pays out of pocket from their paycheck. So let's say, for example, for this particular employee, the amount that they're supposed to pay for every paycheck is $175. And you can add a maximum amount, just in case you add more paychecks through the year, like one-off paychecks type of thing. So you can add a maximum amount to make sure that once they reach, in this case, since it's twice a month and it's a total of 24 payments, the total amount that the employee is supposed to pay per year is 175 times 24. By doing the calculation, capping it here, you prevent, if you create one-off paychecks and stuff like that, from the system overcharging or over-deducting health insurance. Now, for most, you might have to talk to your accountant about this, but most plans are pre-tax, which means that the employee gets a benefit from this, that they don't pay taxes, so to speak. Then the company contribution, I guess, is the portion that the employer pays, because health insurance is a lot more than $350 a month. So then you're going to put the portion that the employer pays. So let's say the employer is paying an additional $500 a year in this, and that's $6,000 total for the year. You can add your maximum. That way, every paycheck that gets created, it calculates both the 175 that the employee is getting deducted from the paycheck, the 500 that the employer is accumulating per paycheck. So the combination of the two, the 675, is the total amount of health insurance liability that the company has to pay, which includes a portion in the paycheck and the portion that the employer is paying as a benefit. So we click on save. And there's a couple more deductions that I want to cover. So here are additional ones like retirement plans. It's very, very typical. So we click on retirement plan and then do 401k, and then whatever the amount that the employee selected to put. So let's say the employee wants to put 5% of their paycheck in the 401k, and it knows that there's a maximum based on the employee's age. So it has that for you automatically. And then let's say, for example, the company has a matching element up to 5%. So let's say, for example, it's also 5%. So we'll put that in there, 5%. And then there's no annual, no annual maximum. And let's say that's how we do it. So we, as an employer, we match up to 5%. So the employee could add more than 5%. Let's say they wanted to do 10, 15, 25%, whatever it is. Then you get to cap as an employer how much you match into the 401k. Benefits and payroll get pretty complex. So this is part of the video where things might be a little bit boring. Let's call this 401k. But again, depending on your situation, you may have all sorts of moving parts. You also have a couple of other options like HSA plans, flexible spending accounts. Then you have an other deduction section that gives you cash advance payment, loan repayment, and that sort of thing. So if you do give a cash advance to your employee through a paycheck, and then you want to get it back by getting a deduction, that's what that is for. So we'll go ahead and click on done. And now we have all of our deductions and contributions. One more thing I want to add is here where it says additional pay types, QuickBooks will create a regular pay type for you and then an overtime pay for you based on the state. But if you click on add here, you can create your own custom pay types. And it does a couple of things for you that are preset, but there's all sorts of other types of additional lines in a paycheck that you may want to add in here. So for example, let's say we're going to have a bonus and there's not going to be a recurring amount. We just kind of leave it there. That way, whenever we want to add a bonus, we can just do that on demand. So I'm not going to put a recurring amount in there. I'll just create it. That way, the bonus line, it's available every time or anytime I want to use it in my paycheck. When I click on add one more time, I'm going to pick something else. Let's say we're going to do something like a non-taxable per diem. So for example, if you're paying them a per diem for travel, or maybe a personal use or company car where you're going to have, include that in the paycheck, right? So the employees are paying their taxes for using that asset for personal use. So it's all sorts of really interesting ways to pay. You can also add a new pay type and create your custom one. So let's call this reimbursement. And then we can put here that this is a reimbursement. And in here, we don't do a recurring amount. And then this is non-taxable. So like this, none of this stuff should be affecting your taxes because it's just a reimbursement. They went out there and paid for gas or bought some office supplies, and you want to pay them back through the paycheck, but it not affect their taxes. So now that we have all those additional items created, they will be available in the paychecks for us to create. Now, there's also a contractor section that's actually different than employees. It's actually not payroll per se, but you can also add the ability to track electronic payments to your subcontractors and also prepare those 1099s at the end of the year. You do have to pay a little bit extra to have direct deposit, direct payment enabled for those subcontractors and 1099 preparation at the end of the year. If you don't pay them electronically, if you pay them with a regular check or whatever, you can still prepare the 1099s at year end without having to pay any monthly fee, but you will pay one-time fee at the very end of the year to just prepare the 1099s. Okay, so let's go back into overview here. And then again, we can go through the task list and make sure that we have set up everything. We haven't told it details about the company tax ID or tax payment preferences. That's where we do all of this. So let's go to let's set up your taxes, and let's click here. It says enter your tax information. I'm going to click on start, and then I'm going to click here. It says set up auto tax. So basically QuickBooks will pay the taxes for you, take the money out of the bank account, take care of all that stuff so you don't have to worry about it. It's actually a great thing. So in here, we pick the type of company that we have. We go to next, double check the address, go to next, put our tax ID information up here, and then it asks you which payroll tax form do you file. For most employers, it's going to be the form 941. If you're not 100% sure, ask your accountant or click I'm not sure and contact tech support to make sure that they help you through that. Now, how often do you have to pay taxes? Now, that's different for every employer. QuickBooks will recommend semi-weekly, which is the most frequent amount of payments, but some employers are so little that they do monthly or quarterly. I just pick semi-weekly because that's the same pace in which you're paying paychecks. Might as well pay your taxes immediately after you do your paycheck. I'm gonna click on next. Then I'm gonna put my other tax information. So for example, in Florida, there's something called the unemployment insurance number. In different states, there'll be different requirements here. So you have to get that information and enter it in there. And then once you enter that, you're going to enter whatever number they give you in terms of that's the rate that you're going to be paying. So usually in Florida, they send you a letter and they tell you exactly what number you will be paying. Again, you might need to talk to your accountant or engage QuickBooks tech support to go through the process, because you have to register with the states and the municipalities if it applies to make sure that you have all these appropriate numbers to be able to file correctly. So once you've done enough of your setup, the button that says Pay My Team will enable. That button basically means QuickBooks is ready to generate a paycheck. Before I do that, I want to show you one more thing. I'm going to click on this gear menu on the top right. And then in here, under your company, there should be an area called Payroll Settings. If you go back into the setting, any of the things that we have set up through the step-by-step task manager, I could always go back here and add or change. So for example, here on general tax, I can click on the little pencil. That's where I can go back and change my official address. Here on federal tax, I click on the pencil. That's where I can change the tax ID and change the type of form that I'm filing. Here on the Florida tax, again, or whatever state you're in, multiple states could show up in here. That's where you enter your additional state tax information. Then this is where auto payroll, this is where it tells you that we have set up automatic payroll. That way it automatically pays your employees and automatically files the taxes. But none of the employees are set up on auto payroll yet. So we're going to do a manual paycheck. And then again, almost everything in here that you have set up already, you can click on the pencil button and edit. So definitely go through those settings to see everything that you have available. Let's go ahead and prepare our very first paycheck. Let's click on where it says Pay My Team. We'll click on that, and then we'll start running our payroll. So the very first paycheck is due on the 15th of the month. Here are my pay periods already pre-set up for me based on how I told it that I would be paying my employees. I don't have any hours tracked via my time tracking system. If I had some hours in my time tracking system, they would show up in here. As a matter of fact, I'm actually going to go ahead and go back out of this, put the timesheet in. That way you actually see the information in the timesheet. But before I do that, you can actually edit the paycheck manually by clicking on Edit Paycheck. And you can actually go in there and actually manually put your hours. So let's say this is 61 hours. And then vacation pay, let's say is 8 hours. And then let's say they get a $200 bonus and a $250 reimbursement. So it actually will calculate the net pay for you. And also there's a gross pay element, and it'll make the calculation for you. If you scroll down, you know exactly how much the employee is going to be paying in taxes for that paycheck and year to date. And then if you scroll down a little bit more, you will see exactly how much the employer is paying in taxes and also additional deductions that the employee is paying on that paycheck. And at the very end of the screen, you can add a memo, click on Save, and generate that paycheck. Now I'm gonna go ahead and X out of that, and I'm gonna use the time tracking system so you can see how it interacts with the paycheck at the very end. So I'm gonna X out of that, and I'm gonna go into my timesheet. So I'm gonna go into the create button, and then I'm gonna click on weekly timesheet. I click on weekly timesheet, and then I'm gonna in the drop down menu, select my employee, John Smith, and then I'm gonna click on the week that it applies. So let's say it's gonna be this first week of January. And then in here, I tell it how many hours the employee worked. As an option, you can tell it the particular customer you were working on, the particular class, if you're using class allocations, what particular item of service, if you're later on gonna invoice your client for that time, the location, if you're doing location tracking, and the pay time, which is usually gonna be regular pay, but you can also actually point out which job they were doing overtime for and that sort of thing. And if you're going to invoice your client some sort of billable rate for their time, you can do it here. So all sorts of flexibilities here on the left hand side, and then you're going to put the number of hours that they worked on that project. Now let's say your employee didn't work on any projects whatsoever, and you can just ignore everything here on the left hand side. You don't need to have all that. You can actually delete multiple lines, okay? Like, so it adds 3 for you, but as you add more, you can have a whole bunch of multiple lines. So you could really track at the very line level detail per job, per customer, per class, per location, how detailed and granular you want to be with your payroll, especially if you're going to track profitability by job, by project, by location, by department, all that stuff. So let's go ahead and for one project, let's go ahead and pick that here, and we'll pick a class, and we'll pick an item here. So I'm just picking anything that's in here, clicking overtime, regular, and then let's say it would be 80 and 80, 8 and 8 hours. And let's say for this second piece, that way you kind of see it, I'm gonna go ahead and do 8, 8, 8, and then I'm gonna pick the pay type as regular pay, and then let's say the last one's gonna be overtime pay, and they're gonna get paid 3 hours of overtime. So that way we kind of know the first 40 hours are tracked in the first 2 lines. 16 of them are for particular project job class, and the other 24 don't have any of that stuff. Again, not required. And then I specifically told it which day it's officially the overtime. So I'm gonna click on save and close. X out of that. Now my timesheet is entered. Then when I go back and create my paycheck, that data is going to transfer automatically from the timesheet into here. And if I click on edit time, it will take me back into the timesheet, and there's a whole timesheet approval process if you actually enable that. So that's also available. And then we can click on edit custom projects, and that's where we can actually see how the data was entered and how it's transferring into the paycheck with that class information, with that customer project information. So you can get very granular, you can add more splits, very, very granular, very, very advanced. Okay, so my paycheck is ready in terms of the number of hours and my gross pay and all that stuff. And again, there's only 1 week's worth of data here. As I mentioned earlier, we can edit the paycheck here, and we can add more hours if we want to. So let's say I want to add more regular pay. So let's go type 80 here. And then just make sure that if you overwrite it, it's going to overwrite the data that's in the timesheets. So if you want to respect the timesheet data, you don't want to overwrite in here. You want to go back into the timesheet and add those additional hours in there. Okay, so that's kind of how you want to do it. So just keep in mind that you either use timesheets or you don't use timesheets, but you can't overwrite the paycheck with ease unless you want to break that timesheet connection. Okay, so we'll leave it like that, as a matter of fact, and then we go back and see the net paycheck. So again, this paycheck is $13.02. That's the dollar amount that the employee gets. But remember, there's all sorts of moving parts like overtime, vacation, income taxes, withholdings, 401k, insurance. Everything is pretty much applied here, which is pretty amazing. So we're going to click on save, and then that paycheck should be ready to be processed. Now we're going to click on preview payroll. Okay, that's going to be the next step for QuickBooks to make your calculations, let you know, okay, this is exactly what's going on. Your employee is going to get $1,300 $2.13. However, you're going to pay as an employer out of pocket $2,544, which includes all your obligations, all your taxes. So exactly the check that you give to your employee doesn't always match the out-of-pocket cost to the employer, how much the employer has to pay. Then I'm going to click on chart of accounts and pick the bank account that I'm going to pay from. Okay, once you set that up, usually the next paycheck, it remembers that. But many employers pay payroll out of one specific account, and they use a different operating account for all other things. So we'll click on submit payroll. And then once you do that, if you're going to print the checks, if you have printable paychecks, you just enter the check number. And then you can click on print pay stub. And you know exactly what the pay stub is going to look like. So you're going to give this to your employee, or if your employee has that created the account for the self-serving, they'll be able to log in remotely and see all their paycheck information through the QuickBooks Workforce portal. But you'll have a copy of every single pay stub you can give to them, or you can keep for your records. Then you can also click on download payroll reports. That will take you to this portal where you can choose all the reports that you want to download. So you want to save them. I usually select everything. Click on export to Excel, and you get this really awesome spreadsheet that contains a full summary of everything you did on that particular pay run. Look at this spreadsheet for spreadsheet nerds like me. I love this, love having all that data saved, all the payroll summaries for every single paycheck, for every single employee, including tax payments, my total cost, payroll and tax wage summaries, tax liability. Everything is very clear for my records to know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing post finishing that payroll. Then I'm going to click on Finish Tax Setup. And because it's the very first time I run payroll, QuickBooks is going to ask you to add your bank information. That way it can extract the money from your bank, pay the taxes, and go through that process. I won't be able to do that because this is a sample file, but you're going to be doing that once, and that's it. Your payroll will be executed. And that's it. I hope you liked this video, that it was helpful. Step-by-step process, how to set up your payroll and how to create your first paycheck. Make sure to use the link in the description below if you're going to create your own, very first time, your own payroll, your own QuickBooks account. And just contact me if you want to add payroll to your existing QuickBooks so you can get that 30% discount for the first 12 months. Hope that was useful. See you in the next one.